we go.
Good morning, everyone. Condos in general in the past year have gone through some significant changes, definitely reduced guidelines, which is good. Fannie's come out with a lot of good things to help us get these approved, especially as of June, we can do a limited review now on investment properties, which is huge. That opens the door for a lot of new business regarding condos. Basically, this is going to be more geared towards conventional financing because that's where you're going to run into a lot of issues with actually getting a condo approved. For VA and FHA, all you have to make sure is that the condo project is on their approved list. USDA will take a VA approved condo, an FHA approved condo, or a condo that can be approved under Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac's guidelines. So they don't have a particular list. It's just if it meets one of the three, you're okay USDA. Also, on a side note, if you have an FHA condo and the approval expired within the last 6 months, FHA has a recertification that we can do, and it's substantially less time and energy and documentation to get that condo recertified if it did expire within the last 6 months than it would to get a whole project done. Some of you have come to me with, okay, I have this, this veteran and they want to purchase this condo, say in Maryland, and it's not on the approved list. What do I need? Well, I can help you with that. I can tell you a lot of different documentation, and there's a significant amount of time that goes into it. So while it's possible, it's best to try to find a project that's actually already approved. Unless, like I said, FHA, it expired within the last 6 months, then you can do the recertification, and that is less time and documentation, so it's definitely a possibility. This is just your VA approval, what you search. Search under state, search under project name. It'll kick back the actual condo approval with your ID number, let you know that it's valid and not expired and how long it's good for. This is how you would look it up FHA. The previous slide, of course, had the links, and I'm going to send this out just so everybody can search for themselves to try to find out if the condo is approved or not. Now, for VA, if it's on VA's list and it's approved, like, you don't have to have a condo questionnaire. You don't have to get into fidelity bond coverage or a budget or anything like that at all. You just have to make sure it's approved, it's not expired, you're good to go. Now, for conventional, you actually have to go through the process of getting your individual condo unit approved. You're going to need a condo questionnaire. You're going to need the HOA master property insurance policy, the liability insurance policy, fidelity policy, if the project itself consists of more than 20 units, or if it's a full review, and I'll go into full review versus limited review later. You're going to need a budget, and then just for FHA VA, you have to have proof that it's on the approved project list. In some cases, you're going to need the declarations and the bylaws for the condo. I can tell you that that is going to be for new projects, conventional financing. We have to do a legal review, essentially, to make sure that the project is set up correctly, that everything is put into place. We actually have to get a copy of those. Otherwise, if it's an established project, you're probably never going to get the decks and bylaws, so don't worry about that. Now, the first thing that Fannie did to relax guidelines was February 2018, they removed the requirement that detached condos have to have a limited project review. We used to actually have to get a limited review questionnaire, the insurance documentation, everything, just to make sure that it still met their guidelines, but they actually did away with that, which is good. So we do not have to worry about that anymore. You do not have to have a condo questionnaire on a detached project, detached unit for Fannie Mae conventional financing. Now, FHA, they consider their detached condo projects site condos. Site condos do not have to be on FHA's approved list. There's no project review requirement. There's nothing that you have to have for a detached condo for FHA. Now the catch is VA is not like that. VA, a detached condo project, still has to have a VA approval. So that is one caveat. And of course, USDA detached condo projects do not require project approval because in this instance, they'll follow FHA, they'll follow Fannie. Remember with USDA, you just have to have a project that could be approved either VA, FHA, or conventional to proceed. Sorry guys, got a little click happy there. Now, this is huge. Ineligible project characteristics for condos. Any project that's pretty much advertised as a hotel motel type of thing, and I've seen these before, they're typically more or less your coastal condos. Those are not eligible at all. Projects that have split ownership arrangements or restrict a borrower's ability to use the property, like a timeshare. Say our borrower can only, have the property for 6 months and then they have to rent it out for 3 months to this certain group of people. Like, we can't have anything like that restricts our borrower's ability to either occupy it, as a primary, occupy it, part of the year as a second residence, or just have it as their own investment property without having to have restrictions. We can't have a project that contains a multi-dwelling unit. We cannot have houseboats, boat slip projects, and they do exist. We cannot have a project that operates as a continuing care community or facility. One thing with that I do want to say, there are projects, especially more or less in Florida, where the borrowers have to be, say, 55 or older to reside in them. Fannie has no problem with that. There's enough of a market for projects like that. There's no restriction. These would just be like your actual care facilities that you couldn't have. Anything that has like the 50 and older, the 55 and older communities, those are fine as long as they're not actual care communities. We can't have non-incidental business arrangements. We can't have the spa being ran by an HOA, things like that. We can't have projects with commercial space in excess of 35%. And I'd say those are more urban areas that you actually have to worry about because they might have small businesses towards like the bottom of the project, and then you have like a high rise. As long as whatever business they have, commercial use is 35% or less, you're going to be fine. Projects in litigation, that is a huge issue, and I see that a lot. Minor litigation is okay. Any litigation that has to deal with the safety of the project, like, for example, I know in Columbus right now, I think it's Hayden Run condominiums, if I remember correctly. They're in lawsuit because the builder essentially built all of the decks to where someone actually fell off of one and they're not sturdy. There's a huge safety issue. I've had projects where, just the windows weren't done correctly. They were infiltrated with mold, like things like that where your borrower, it's a safety issue, like we can't proceed with. If the HOA is being sued for a minor slip and fall incident, like we've had those go through. It just depends on the litigation in question. Major issues with the project though, especially structural, anything to do with the building, that's not going to work. Projects that permit priority lien for unpaid assessments, those are not okay just because our first mortgage lien has to be protected. Any project with the mandatory membership fees for use of recreational amenities like country clubs, That's not okay. You can't have membership fees paid for the use of recreational amenities owned exclusively by the HOA, but it really depends on how they have it set up. It's pretty rare I actually see that. I'd say litigation is more of the issue so far with the things that I've brought up. We can't have projects with mandatory rental pooling agreements, and that goes into the condo hotel type of thing where it becomes an issue. We can't have more than 15% of the total units in a project more than 60 days past due on their assessments. That's essentially, if we start exceeding that percentage, then we start questioning the viability of the project itself and its ability to, maintain the things that it's supposed to, whether it be a clubhouse, a pool, the exterior of the units, things like that. So that's something to look out for. We also have to have 10% of the HOA's income set aside for reserves. Lack of sufficient fidelity bond coverage, that's another issue that we run into. Again, we don't have to have those on a limited review condo, but on a full review, fidelity bond coverage is key. It's a requirement, and sometimes that becomes an issue if we don't have enough of it. And I'll get into exactly how much you need in later slides. Now, some of the big changes that happened June of 2018. The single entity ownership. Because on a questionnaire we have, whether it's limited review, full review, Fannie's, our version, we ask how many individuals own more than one unit and how many units do they own. And we ask that because of this guideline. Fannie Mae previously only allowed 10%. So if I'm, buying condo units in this project, I can only own 10% of them myself. If I own 15%, then it wasn't eligible. Fannie Mae went ahead and increased that to 20%. So that opens up doors. I saw a lot of this where we would just be over the 10%. We'd have this one investor that came in and wanted to have rentals and they own 11% or 12%. Well, now they increased that to 20%. So I'd say that's really good because I was on the border a lot when I would do condo reviews with this 10%. The commercial space, it was 25%. The actual use of the project itself, and now they've increased it to 35%. That's good. That opens up, again, our urban areas. That's where we see that, and it's typically just the lower portion of the project, the high rise, that have those businesses. So just increasing it 10% from 25 to 35% for the commercial use and from 10% to 20% on the single entity ownership, that opens a lot from me actually reviewing condos to where things were, not eligible to now being eligible, which is good. The biggest thing I think that helps a lot of people, the investment property transactions that now are allowed to have a limited review. Now, limited review, of course, is the questionnaire is essentially cut in half. You're only asking half the questions that you would ask on a full review. So previously, all condos had to be a full review that were investment property transactions. Now, if you have, your LTV, your CLTV at 75%, you can do a limited review. This means not getting liability insurance at all because limited reviews don't require that. This means no fidelity bond coverage because limited reviews don't require that. And of course, like I said, this is like the questionnaire is cut in half for these investment properties. So to me, that's huge. Also, FHA project review. So you're looking, your condo project is approved on FHA's list and it's valid and it's unexpired. Well, Fannie will take that now. That's huge. Say you don't want your borrower to have the MIP for FHA. Well, now they don't have to worry about it. You can go conventional. You can use this condo approval that FHA has, and you don't have to worry about, what's appearing on this questionnaire because you don't need one. FHA already approved it, and Fannie's going to follow it. So to me, this is a pretty big deal. They did relax some of the guidelines on projects operating as a hotel or motel. So I won't get into the nitty-gritty of this. Of course, I'll send it out, but they kind of relaxed their stance and clarified, what it takes We can't have, restrict the owner's ability to occupy the unit, things like that. Same with live work condo projects. I feel like this happens a lot with CPAs, attorneys that work out of their home. As long as your condo is primarily residential in nature, if someone had an office for like I said, they were a CPA, they were an attorney, something like that, like it's permitted now. They used to have really strict guidelines on this, so.
Let's stop real quick because we have a couple questions in the chat. We'll do Peggy's first.
FHA, do we need the condo questionnaire also? Here's the deal with FHA. When we get the approval, we make sure it's on their approved list. We still have to rep and warrant that it does meet FHA guidelines. So there are a few questions that we have to ask, and a limited review condo questionnaire or having a processor call would be what we would need to do. There are only a few questions. The delinquency is one of them for the HOA. I can definitely email those out to everybody. But right now, FHA, it's 2 years in. They're redoing their entire condo guidelines. So I've been kind of checking periodically to see when they're going to come out with exactly what we're going to do, because there's been talk of bringing back spot approvals and things like that, but they're currently redoing all of their guidelines and they're honestly taking their time. So right now we still have to rep and warrant that it meets FHA guidelines. So there are a few questions we have to ask, but you're not going through, you're not getting a full condo questionnaire and going through the whole rhetoric there. It's just a few things. What if one condo association rents out their pool to another condo association? Well, that's actually okay, an HOA to an HOA. Just like if you have an HOA that rents out or that allows another HOA to use their amenities in a project, that's perfectly fine. It's when, I'll give you an example, an HOA rents out their pool to an apartment complex that's not a legally defined condo. That's an issue, and I have had that, and Fannie will not accept that. HOA between HOA is fine, though. Does the percentage of single owner go on the phase or the whole project? The whole project itself, not the phase, Tony. What if the other HOA is a timeshare development? That is a problem. I can put that in an email with more clarification, but that does bring up an issue. The rent thing isn't new. It's just an HOA between an HOA is fine. It's when you have an outside entity it's an issue. But I'll go ahead and send out additional information when I send this out to you guys too. And we're going to get into what everybody loves so much, insurance for condo projects. And I say that because I've been doing this for 8 years and it's constantly changing what's required, and I know it's definitely tedious to actually get what we need. So we have to have a master insurance policy for the HOA. We're looking at building property coverage, liability, and fidelity bond coverage. Projects that are reviewed under the limited review method do not require liability or fidelity insurance. Now, your master policy for your HOA, what should my policy include? Well, property insurance, coverage for the project improvements, liability, general commercial liability. If you have to have it on a full review, it's minimum of $1 million coverage, and sufficient fidelity insurance. Now, fidelity, you have to cover the maximum amount of funds in the custody of the HOA and or management agent at one time while the policy is in force. And we are looking for our borrower name and property address to be added to these policies, primarily the property coverage, because obviously most condo projects, the exterior is covered by this HOA policy. Now the interior, it depends on the actual project itself, but Now the property insurance. We have to cover 100% of the insurable replacement cost of the project's improvements. Now, we may or may not have coverage for the interior. When the interior coverage includes the betterments and improvements, if there are any, then we're fine. We don't need an individual HO6. When it doesn't cover this, then we do. And I've got slides where I try to kind of break it down a little bit more for you with when your borrower needs an HO6 and when they don't. Now, liability insurance, not required on a limited review, of course, but when you do have to have it, it has to cover the entire project. You have to have a minimum of $1 million in coverage, not required on limited reviews in 2 to 4 unit projects. Honestly, the liability is never an issue. Even on projects that we don't have to have it, I feel like most HOAs at least have $1 million just to cover themselves. It's generally not an issue. Now here's where it gets a little more complicated. We always have where the HOA, we get the master policy, and we're trying to figure out, does our borrower need an HO6? And I've had, well, my insurance agent from Allstate says I don't need an HO6 because my master policy covers everything. Well, here's the caveat. If your master policy covers the interior and exterior of the unit, any betterments and improvements made, then you don't have to have an HO6 policy. Now, let's say your master policy covers the interior and exterior to the original builder specifications. Now, you might not need an HO6, and that's if your condo project is, say it was built 15 years ago, no improvements have been made. Everything's builder grade. Your appraiser is saying it's a C4 condition, average, no repairs needed, but nothing's been done to the project. Nothing's been added on to increase the value. You know, you haven't totally gutted the bathrooms and redone everything. Everything is essentially how it was according to the decks and bylaws that are for this project. You don't have to have an HO6. Now, if I go buy a condo project and within the last 15 years, I've, gutted multiple things, and I've added marble floors, and I've added all these fixtures, and I put this beautiful deck on. Okay, your policy covers to original builder specifications. You have to have an HO6 that covers these betterments and improvements. So that's where it comes into play. It's difficult because sometimes people go ahead and they get the insurance and they don't need it, and sometimes it's a fight to actually get insurance that we need on a policy. What I can tell you is if you have a master policy that covers the exterior and walls in and betterments and improvements made, then you're fine. You don't have to have an HO6. It becomes an issue when it's just the exterior of the unit, or it says up to the builder specifications, and you have to further dig into, has there been anything done to this unit that could increase the value that we need to make sure we cover. Now, we can ask the insurance agents for their method of determining replacement cost coverage when we have to have an HO6. We can get a copy of their insurance appraisal. We can get a copy of their cost estimator. Or I've seen where some different agencies have like a system where they just, essentially it's like a cost estimator, but it's their own software where they plug in, how close is the property to a fire hydrant, and what is the square footage, things like that, and it kicks back a number. That's fine. We're just trying to figure out how this agent is coming up, when we have to have this HO6 for essentially the replacement cost coverage. Things that are really good to have on your policy: guaranteed replacement cost, extended replacement cost, and just the replacement cost coverage endorsement. Guaranteed replacement cost, the insurer agrees to replace the insurable property regardless of the cost, whether that's your typical homeowner's policy or an HO6. That is like the best you can have, and no one should question your coverage when you have that endorsement to your policy. Extended replacement cost coverage, the insurer agrees to pay more than the property's insurable replacement cost. That's also good. And then of course the replacement cost coverage, just having 100% of the property's replacement taken care of. So those are things to look out for, and you can use those Obviously, not even on condos, just on your HO3s if you have these endorsements, because they're essentially telling you that everything's going to replace like it should be.
And I'm going to jump in real quick on this and just kind of give you guys the reminder, from an underwriting perspective on your liability insurance, if you, like Christina said, are walls in, it includes betterment, includes everything. We as the lender are not going to require an HO6 policy. However, I would not recommend going to your borrowers and saying, oh, hey, you don't need an HO6 policy. Your borrowers are likely still going to want to get some sort of insurance. So even though as a lender, we're not going to require that in order to get your clear to close, it's still good to advise your borrower and to have some sort of insurance for the things that are going to be in their unit. Correct. In addition, reminder that now as the lender, if we have a HO6 policy that comes in that doesn't cover the loan amount, we actually are either going to have to get some sort of proof from that agent directly about the replacement cost, or if that agent is not going to provide proof of the replacement cost, we're going to have to go to another agent who can provide us proof of the replacement cost. So keep that in mind. If your processor is coming back to you and saying, hey, this agent's not getting me proof of replacement cost, we need it. That's not your processor just trying to make your life miserable. That is a new requirement that we rolled out sometime in the spring. Fannie came back and let us know that we actually have to have proof of the replacement cost from the agent now. So just keep those two quick items in mind.
Now, fidelity bond coverage. If you do a lot of condos, or if you've tried one and you've had to have a full review because you have like a 97 LTV on a purchase, then you might have run into this. So fidelity bond is a form of insurance protection that covers policyholders for losses that incur as a result of employee theft or money mismanagement. According, fidelity insurance is required for all condo projects with more than 20 units, with the exception of condos meeting Fannie and Freddie's limited review criteria. So of course, if you have a project that's only 10 units, you don't have to worry about it. If you have a limited review, you don't have to worry about it at all. But if you have a 50-unit condo project and you're of course at the 97 LTV, you're subject to a full review, you have to have this fidelity bond coverage. Now, sufficient fidelity bond coverage. You have to have the amount of coverage equal no less than the maximum amount of funds in the custody of the HOA or its management firm at one time. So how do we determine that? Well, we have to get a budget when we do a full review. So we're essentially looking at, what are the annual HOA dues? How much do they have in their reserve account? And then we're kind of basing that off, okay, at this, this is the maximum amount, in November of 2018 that this project is going to have in their hands at one time. We do have the option for reduced coverage. They have to meet, the HOA and management company has to meet specific financial management procedures, one of which would be the HOA and management company have separate accounts for their funds, so they're not commingling their funds. And the HOA's bank statements are actually sent directly to them, not just to the management company. And that's just a protection, this coverage is essentially in place to make sure that these funds are being covered in an adequate manner. So we want to make sure that the HOA gets a copy and that the financials are kept separately. Another thing would be 2 members of the board of the HOA have to sign any checks, any disbursements against the reserve account itself. Again, another financial protection, essentially. So when you have either one of these, you only have to have 3 months of assessments in the project covered, essentially. The calculation would be, say I have 20 units. Then we take that over 3 months times whatever the monthly HOA due is, and that would be your coverage. Say they kept $500,000 in their custody at one time based on the budget, but then when you look at, I have 30 units over 3 months at $200 HOA dues, I only need $50,000. I'm not doing the math, but I'm just letting you know they're substantially less if they have financial management procedures in place. Most of them do. Anymore, I don't see where the management company and the HOA actually commingle their funds. So that's a good thing. And obviously, as long as the HOA gets a copy of their bank statements, and they should be, then you can use the lesser amount. Now, again, with this fidelity bond coverage, when you have to have it, the management agent, management company has to have it too, just because ultimately they're the ones that are handling these funds, they're assisting. We need to make sure that we don't have anybody stealing from the HOA. We don't have anybody writing checks to people that they shouldn't be. So the management company has to have the same amount that the HOA does. So if the HOA meets those limited financial controls that I just told you about, at least one of them, then the management company only has to have that, you know, say $50,000 instead of $500,000. So it's going to follow whatever the HOA has to have. But just know that you have to have the management company covered. A lot of the times the management company is covered under the HOA's policy. So that would be your processor, essentially, when they call to get this and they call to ask about this fidelity bond, like, hey, is Innovative Management Inc. covered under this fidelity bond? A lot of the times they are, which is helpful because then you're only getting one policy. So that's just something to point out. Flood insurance. You have a project in a flood zone, the HOA has to have flood insurance. If the HOA does not have sufficient flood insurance for your entire unit itself, and most of the time they don't, they'll get, you know, the replacement cost, but let's say the interior, the betterments and improvements aren't covered, then you do have to have a separate flood policy. But the HOA itself always has to carry a flood insurance policy if any part of the condo project is within a special flood hazard area. That's just something to watch out for. Now I'm sending this out to you. I'm not going to get too much into this, but new projects versus established projects. This has to go with the condo questionnaire. When we ask, are at least 90% of the total units in the project conveyed to unit purchasers? I mean, that makes it established, essentially. The project is at 100% complete. Has the control been turned over to the HOA? Why this is important. If you have a project and let's say, oh, my developer, you know, just finished it. We've got 5% of the units left to sell, but control of the HOA hasn't been turned over yet. Well, guess what? Now you have a new project. With the new project, that's where you're looking at the decks and bylaws. That's where you're looking at a full review that just adds an additional layer of essentially documentation and conditions that you're going to get to make sure that this project is okay. So just something to point out, like why we ask those questions, because we want it to meet the definition of established, so we don't have to worry about going after the additional documentation. But again, if fewer than 90% of the total units have been turned over, then it becomes a full review. It's a new project. You're looking at decks and bylaws and kind of diving into all of that. So now I updated this. It breaks out Florida separately because, of course, they have separate requirements for the review type. So it goes by your occupancy and your maximum LTV, CLTV. Something I want to point out to you that I think some people forget. Let's say you have a purchase, primary residence, 90% LTV, but you put on North Carolina housing DPA. Your CLTV goes over that 90%. Now you have to have a full review. I just want to point that out because I've seen where, oh, my LTV is 90%. Well, if you add a second onto that and you go above 90%, then you are going to look at a full review. But of course, this is updated now to show the investment properties that now allow for the limited review, which is great. And it breaks out Florida, and I'll be sending this out to everybody. This is important because if you have a condo and you're trying to get it approved conventional, and you do meet the requirements for a limited review, you don't want to get a full review questionnaire. I'm just saying that because I've had multiple discussions with Fannie Mae. If I have a limited review and it meets a limited review and you give me a full review and I see something wrong on that would otherwise make the project ineligible, I can't unsee that, and now your review type just turned into a full review and you have a potential eligibility issue. So like this chart, if there's anything you take from this presentation, please use this. just make sure you're following, and if it meets a limited, please only get the limited review. Don't worry about getting extra documentation, because in this case, it only ends up hurting you rather than helping you. This is just another little, essentially, cheat sheet for your insurance and your documentation types. Of course, I'll be sending out. More or less, I'll breeze through this. This is more for processing what the 1008 needs to look like, what kind of review you have. You guys just need to worry about what kind of questionnaire and documentation essentially we're getting. This would be for your processor. Oh yes, another nice relaxed guideline. 2 to 4 unit condo projects do not require a review, so that's awesome. So they started with the detached projects, and then they moved along to the 2 to 4 unit. We don't have to have any type of review, no questionnaire, no budget, no anything. It's great. Because a lot of these, I did these, and you would have an HOA that was run by, 2-3 people. So getting a questionnaire filled out, when yes, it's a legally recognized condo, was quite difficult. So this one, very excited about. Now we also allow non-warrantable condos. We have them with Huntington, ERP FlexKey, and Caliber. Depending on where your state is, would depend on whether you could use one of these 3 investors. If you want more information, let me know. You can only do individual units. I've had people ask about projects. None of these investors will do entire projects. They have to underwrite the file, the investor, on all 3 of these, and they have to review the condo documentation. So just want to caution you that while they're available, they are underwritten by another investor. Now, we also have the ability with Fannie Mae to do this thing called a project waiver. Let's say I'm doing a full review on your 97 LTV borrower and I find one thing wrong. Let's say that they're single entity ownership. I'll pull that one. The developer owns 25% of the units and they can only own a max of 20. So that would make it essentially ineligible. But now with this project waiver, we can submit to Fannie Mae for a $200 fee, and we could essentially have them waive this. So you could proceed with a warrantable condo, pay this fee, and get this project waiver approved. I'd say I've had about a 75% success rate with these. You cannot do it on fidelity bond. I'll go ahead and put that out there. I've tried. They will not make any type of exception or allow any type of waiver on fidelity bond coverage. But if you have one small thing that doesn't meet, that's not related to fidelity bond, we do have the ability to do a project waiver, of course, for a $200 charge. And one other thing before I bring up the rest of the questions. If you have an agent that says, hey, I have this condo and I think there could be something wrong with it, or another lender saying that it's non-warrantable, if you send that to the CDA mailbox, Diana lets me know and I can kind of look at it for you and say, oh, hey, yeah, I see like 3 major issues, or no, I'm not quite sure what this other lender's looking at, but I don't see any issue at all. And I could kind of guide you and let you know whether we could proceed with your project. So that's just something to point out.
So Casey, I know you mentioned HO6 agents don't provide replacement cost estimators often. That's true. We have seen some issues going back to agents and asking them for proof of cost estimators. However, as long as they can provide some sort of documentation, even if it's not a cost estimator, but it proves how they got to finding their replacement cost amount, we can take that documentation. Essentially, we just need the agent to confirm and provide numbers. They can't just say, oh, yeah, that'll provide, that'll cover the replacement cost. Well, that's great, but we need proof of that. So whatever the agent that can provide us with proof of what the replacement cost actually is going to be, we can accept that. And then, Casey, I know you asked about how do we let our processing team know when to order full versus limited. You've got it right on the money. As long as you note in your story that it's going to be a limited review, just state that in your story to the processing team. Please just order a limited questionnaire with the HOA or with the condo association. That's perfect. in general, I would say it's always better to just err on the side of limited if you're not sure. And then if we need the full review, we can go back and get the full review, especially if you're dealing with an association that doesn't charge for them to fill out the, the questionnaire. So you can err on the side of caution, do limited. But if you know for sure, just note it in your story and your team will order the correct docs for you.
Yes, Tony, you can get that non-warrantable info. Now, the $200 fee, I just brought that up on the slide for the non-warrantable condos because if you have a project and there's only one small thing wrong with it that doesn't have to do with the fidelity bond coverage, Fannie has this thing called a project waiver where we pay $200 and essentially they look at the file itself. They're going to look at the LTV, the reserves, the condo documentation, and they can issue a waiver for that one item that does not meet guidelines. So it'll technically still be a warrantable condo. It's just we're going to pay a $200 fee to see if we can get an approval for whatever eligibility item that we came across. Obviously, if you have a project that has like 3 eligibility items, it's going to be non-warrantable and that falls into a different bucket, but we do have the ability to do the waiver for $200 for one-off things on the project that make it ineligible.
Marina, I'm not sure that we're understanding your question. I would say if you know that the association is going to charge dues, then yeah, absolutely, you should provide that information. Your underwriter is going to condition out for that to be on your docs and in your DTI. So we would still escrow for the HOA dues, though, or the condo dues. If that doesn't answer your question, feel free to let us know. We can definitely try to readdress it if we're not understanding you correctly.
Anything else, guys?
Give you a couple minutes here just so we make sure we don't miss anybody. So, Alex, yeah, you're correct on that. I'm sorry, I misspoke on that. We will count the escrow dues in the DTI just to make sure your borrower qualifies, but yes, we won't necessarily escrow for them.
Yes, both questionnaires are on Equity Zone. Obviously, some HOAs provide their own, and that's fine. There's nothing we can do. Sometimes they won't fill out ours, but we have our own limited and for review questionnaires available on Equity Zone for use.
Give you one more minute. We'll wrap up at 11:15 if nobody else has other questions. Kathy, you're welcome. We're happy to do it. What we'll do is we'll wrap up here. Christina or myself, one of us will send out the presentation to you later that'll have the links to all the agency guidelines. It'll also include information in regards to, the equity zone. Tony will make sure we send you the non-warrantable information. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us after the training. We'd be more than happy to assist you guys. Thanks so much for being on the call. We appreciate it.